Okay. Hi everyone. I'm Melissa Albino Hegeman. I am the chair of the Professional Development Committee for the New York State GIS Association. Thank you for taking time out of your day to come to our professional development webinar with Catherine DuBreck, who will be summarizing her experience with the Community College Internationalization Fellowship program that's run through Cornell University and the Cornell Syracuse South Asia Consortium. So she'll be talking about her CCIF project, the development of a small geospatial geography course unit, with a lecture and a lab about India. And Catherine, I'm going to turn it over to you. And we'll have time at the end for questions for folks, but you can also drop them in the Q&A section. I will be monitoring that so we can discuss it at the end.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Melissa and Professional Development Committee with the New York State GIS Association for letting me share about my project. I'm Catherine. I have a couple different jobs in the GIS field, but I'm here today as a part-time Monroe Community College GIST employee to share a little bit about a project I've been working on. The goal, so I have some notes. Looks like I'm reading, it's just so I don't forget. And then I'm gonna go through this short summary slideshow and then share a little of the lecture portion slide deck that I'm developing as part of this project. The GIS lab piece is still under construction. Before I jump in, I also just wanted to plug the Westchester County GIS User Group Conference that is tomorrow. If you're downstate, I think registration is still open, and that's at SUNY Purchase. If you're upstate like me, you're supporting from afar. So this is a quick outline of what I'm going to cover today. I'll explain a little bit about what the fellowship is, like what the program is about, how I got involved. I'll get into what my project is, including the inspiration for it and the two components of it, the lecture and lab. And then I'll conclude the presentation with some future work that I have planned in the works. And then, like Melissa said, we'll have time for questions. And this photo relates to my inspiration piece that we'll talk about. I took this in an informal settlement in Lucknow, India last January. So what is this program? What is this fellowship? The CCIF program, the Community College Internationalization Fellowship, this program is available to two-year college faculty in upstate New York. So anyone that works at a community college, like I said, I'm a part-time contract employee, but if you're a professor, if you're a dean, like anybody can get involved. The point of it is to help students become global-minded citizens. So the applicants to this program, you're required to come up with a project that could be as short as creating a new course unit, or it could be as big as creating a new course, or even creating a service learning or an internship component to an existing course that encourages the exchange of ideas and helping our students become more global thinkers. Whatever the project is, small or big, it just has to focus on certain regions of the world. So it can deal with Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, South Asia, which is what the focus of my project is, or Southeast Asia. There's a few other fellows in my cohort, so it's not just me. There's 3 other faculty from Monroe Community College, so you have some big representation there. And there's also 2 professors from Tompkins Cortland Community College, or TC3. There's additional colleges with faculty that have received funding from this project, from this program. In the past, those have included Cayuga, Corning, and Onondaga community colleges. Fun fact, out of the 31 CCIF grants awarded since the 2019-2020 program, 14 of those, or 45%, have been Monroe Community College faculty, so big representation. My project in particular is funded through the Cornell Syracuse South Asia Consortium. So that's a partnership between the South Asia Center at Syracuse University and then the South Asia program at Cornell. And like I said, my project is to create a new course unit for an existing class at MCC. So it's intended to be the Intro GIS course or maybe an Intro Geography course at MCC with a lecture and a lab component related to India. My project doesn't include any like formal process of updating the course syllabus, so we're not like really changing the like guts of the course. Maybe just tweaking where there's in the syllabus, if there's a space to talk about digitizing or georeferencing, that's where this can kind of fit in. That's what the lab piece will be. And the materials and the intent are there for MCC instructors of these courses if they'd like to use it. The lecture portion of the project aims to teach students, like I said, about a different country or culture than their own. So a lot of students at MCC were from Rochester. I'm from Rochester. So we're not like really kind of thinking outside of our little Rochester box. So the intent is to just get students thinking about a different country or culture, and also introduce some global issues like poverty and informal settlements. The lab portion aims to show students a real application of geospatial technology. So if it's taught in the Intro GIS course, we're not just digitizing features to digitize. Here's an application where you can digitize imagery and make a map of this informal settlement or somewhere in India, and that could have powerful impact in the future. This fits well within a geography class, which is what the Intro GIS course at MCC is. It falls under the geography department, but it also fits within MCC's mission to build global engagement and understanding. So it's all tied together. Inspiration for this project came from my participation in the Council of American Overseas Research Centers, or KORC. It's easier to say KORC than the full description. But I participated in their faculty development seminar last year in January 2023, which was on exploring urban sustainability in India with the American Institute of Indian Studies. So this was an opportunity to travel fully funded, which was nice because flights to India are expensive, to travel to India and see some different cities in northern India, how they're handling urban sustainability and just urban issues in general. India is a very populated area of the world, so how are they, handling sustainability with that? And I also went to Lucknow, India, which is sort of the theme of this project. That's where the lab component is focusing on. We visited 2 informal settlements in Lucknow, and I felt really inspired on this trip to bring what I learned and saw on this trip back to MCC and help students learn about these issues in a meaningful way. This photo is of me next to this big elephant statue. This is in Lucknow at Ambedkar Memorial Park. This is a park that's dedicated to B.R. Ambedkar. He was an Indian political activist and a Dalit, or from the scheduled caste. That's like formally known as the untouchable caste. Very low, usually like impoverished, not a lot of opportunities. But he worked for the rights and social freedoms for Dalits. And actually he wrote the Indian Constitution that made untouchability illegal. So before I continue talking about Lucknow and India, geographer in me just wanted to show like where I'm talking about. So just using MCC or even like New York State in general as a starting point, just a quick screenshot from Google, but this is Lucknow over here in India. So this is where the students will be thinking about when they do this lab. As I mentioned, the first part of my project is to create a lecture component. So one of the things I wanted to do with this lecture, and I'll show you when we get through this overview, is start off with an activity. So not just talking at students, but getting them involved in thinking. And this activity, I wanted to have them draw a mental map of India. So I sort of skewed everyone's view already by showing this map, but in the lecture, in the class, we would have this map after. So students would not see any maps of India. They're encouraged to not look it up. Don't cheat. So try and do this by memory. What do you remember about the shape or the country boundary of India? Can you label neighboring countries? Can you label any bodies of water nearby? And also a challenge to label like where is the US in relation? So even if it's just a piece of paper and the US is up in the like left corner, that would be great. This is to get students thinking about the lecture topic before we get into it. Also see what they remember from previous geography classes or social studies class. Then we would have a short class discussion about the mental maps they drew. So what did they remember? Why did they remember those things? Why did they draw them? And talk about what they know about India so far. Sorry, just had to put a different laptop down. Then we'd have an overview lecture on the geography of India and Indian culture. I will reiterate to the students that this is really, really high level overview. I think you could probably spend a whole semester or even like a whole degree program talking about the caste system in general. It's so involved. So this is not meant to be the only exposure students have to India. Just an overview, talking about how geography influences the country. Spend a little time talking about the caste system and the scheduled castes or the Dalits, the people that Ambedkar fought for, and how that ties into poverty. I want to also show a documentary. I think it's like 45 minutes. So it depends on how often the class is taught throughout the semester, or if it's online, students would watch that on their own. But that documentary would be about informal settlements in India, and then have another class discussion about similarities and differences students see with Rochester. So Rochester obviously is not as large of a city as Lucknow or really any of the major cities in India, but there's still some poverty sprinkled in throughout the city. So maybe comparing and contrasting our city with India. Next slide. So this is a map from, okay, this is a map from the Cornell University Library. This program, this fellowship gave me access to Cornell's library system online. This is one of the maps that they have in their collection. It's showing the districts of Lucknow and a couple other cities from 1868. So I'd like to use this in the lecture with the students to help facilitate discussion and talk about like a really, really abridged history of India, and then show this map and try to see what students observe. You know, what is the city developed along? Well, this is a river, there's a couple rivers. There's a bunch of different place names, so those are like little villages. Here's some water bodies down here, so just trying to think geographically with an old map. Yeah, so this is the same map. This is just zoomed in from the previous slide. It's really massive, so this is just looking at Lucknow, talking about also getting the students to talk about how things have changed over time. So we'll talk about this map from 1868 and then look at more recent maps or imagery and think about how it's developed. The second part of my project is a lab where students will use geospatial software and satellite imagery to digitize features, trace the buildings or the roads, maybe that river that we just saw on the old map, the river's still there. and other features that are in an informal settlement in Lucknow, and use those digitized features to create a map. They'll also be looking at a georeferenced map of 1900s Lucknow. So we'll talk about the 1800s map, and then they'll actually look at a 1900s map, early 1900s of Lucknow, to describe how the city's changed over time. Still not sure if they'll actually georeference the map themselves or if I'll georeference it for them. And then they can just examine it, compare it with some satellite imagery. But either way, it will be georeferenced. So this is that map. This is a map of Lucknow from the early 1900s. There's a star here that's marking where the informal settlement that I visited is located today. Fortunately, it's in the legend, so you can't really see it on the map here, but you can see the rest of the city. And then this is a recent image, I think it was March of this year, from Planet Labs. So this is satellite imagery showing that same informal settlement that was marked on this map that you can't really see. And then this is taking the imagery and overlaying that old map on top. The star is still marking the informal settlement, and then the students would look at this, either georeference this map on their own, or just have it and look at it, compare the imagery, see what's changed over time, what's stayed the same. Once this project is complete, the final deliverables are due next Friday, so it's wrapping up really quickly. So I need to figure out the georeferencing piece soon. But once it's complete, I have some future work planned, keeping with the theme of the informal settlement in Lucknow, building on my visit last January, building on what I've learned and researched for this CCIF project. I was awarded a follow-up fellowship from KORC and the American Institute of Indian Studies to spend 3 months next summer living in and conducting research in Lucknow. So my proposed project for this was to teach the residents of the informal settlement that I visited last year, that same settlement that's this imagery is showing with this star, teach the residents that live there about geospatial technology, what is GIS, and use open source GIS, so QGIS and the mobile app versions that integrate with the desktop version to map their community. Many of the residents have smartphones, so they would easily be able to download this app as long as it's available. And they also had a school, so there's a community learning space where we can talk about geospatial technology and GIS. And the goal is to help the residents use and leverage this technology as a tool for empowerment and to help get more government resources, public services, because they also had a sort of community rep that works with local NGOs and the government. So hopefully a map or mapped infrastructure of their neighborhood would help with those conversations. So that's it for the overview. Before we get into questions, I did just want to go over a little bit about the, oops, make Zoom smaller. I'll just go through it this way. So this is the lecture piece of this project so far, starting out with the class outline. So just sharing like what we'll be doing for the day or that week. Highlighted text throughout the slides are meant to be places for discussion. So if it's taught in person, this would be like a full class discussion, just getting students thinking about like what do they know about India? Have they tried Indian food before? Maybe they've watched like a Bollywood film or something. Social media is really good at showing us new cultures that are different from our own. So maybe they've seen some social media influencers that are from India talking about stuff. So just getting students thinking about our topic. If this was taught online, then this would be maybe a discussion post that's graded or just like a reflection of what they know as they're working online. Then we have the mental map assignment. So this is just like an intro on what a mental map is. Hopefully, like people have thought about like their neighborhood or something or tried to draw a mental map before. If not, this is a practice run. So before we get into the mental map of India, just trying to draw a mental map of the MCC Brighton campus. That's usually where the geography courses are taught when they're in person. So maybe drawing like the building their class is in, the main road, maybe they live on campus and they can draw their dorms. Maybe they go to a restaurant off campus, and so they're just trying to draw a mental map of campus first, just a few minutes. And then once we've practiced, we'll take a few more minutes to draw that mental map of India with those pieces that I described, with a reminder not to cheat, because that defeats the whole purpose of a mental map if you look up a map of India. So students will have a few more minutes to do this. They can do it with a partner or alone. If they're taking it online, maybe they'll be doing it alone. This will also be submitted for a grade, just like sort of participation grade. So it's important to not cheat. Once we've had time to draw our mental maps, then we'll review them. So like people aren't getting graded on accuracy, it's more just participating, and then reviewing what their mental maps look like with the actual map of India. So neighboring countries, bodies of water, and then we'll also talk about where we are in relation so students can see if they got their mental map right or not. Then the class discussion will go into some quick facts. So like where are we talking about? Capital, population. I think a lot of people know India is a very populated place. There's a picture of the flag. We'll talk about very, very brief history. So I think people probably remember from social studies those early cities. There's some different rulers. British rule was a big one, and then independence and recent history. So yeah, like this would be another place where I would reiterate that this is not it for history. Like you could take a whole history of India class probably. Um, this is just to get people like thinking about our location of study. Here's that map we just saw. So this will be discussion for the class. Some information on physical geography. So geography isn't just countries and flags, and GIS users like don't just make maps to make maps. We make maps to like look at physical geography, landforms, climate, biogeography. So this is looking at that side of the geography field, talking about landforms, some pictures of those landforms, like the desert. This is, I guess, more of a picture of the climate, so the rainy or monsoon season, talking about the different climate zones and biodiversity. Here's another map that we can talk about. So on this slide, we're looking at pictures that are illustrating different landforms and climates. Deserts are dry, obviously. This rainy area is less dry. Here's a map that shows all of those different climate zones. This is another discussion slide for the class. So looking at or thinking about how geography influences the country, in this case, physical geography. So we'd start out like with this blank slide. Hopefully students would shout out what they think. If not, I have some ideas to get people thinking and talking. So like prehistoric settlements along the major rivers, even present day, people use the river for a lot of different reasons. That biogeography and climate theme. So obviously different climates allow different plants and animals to live and thrive. And here's a good example. So natural indigo dye, and then the indigo plant grows just naturally in India. So there's an example that also kind of can tie into the history slide with the British rule, because there were some issues with making people harvest the indigo and process it for the dye, and then they would sell it really high and then pay the Indian farmers really low. So tying into the history there, hopefully students can think of other examples, and it's not just me or the instructor talking. So and so that's we've talked about history a little bit, physical geography a little bit, getting into more of the human side. So talking about demographics like languages spoken, religions. There's a lot of religions practiced in India. Hindu's the biggest one, but there's a large Muslim majority as well, and Buddhism, other religions as well. I also thought it was important to highlight, tying into the poverty and caste aspect. There's a lot of discrimination, not just towards the lower caste folks, but also Muslim, Islam practicing folks. So there's a large Muslim minority, but India's a mostly Hindu practicing country. But there's been a lot of issues, even like not just today, but historically. We can talk about another tie back to the history with British rule, when India became India and not just that area that the British ruled. There was that separation of the Pakistan boundary, India boundary. People were like migrating across, and it was like really violent. A lot of people died, and a lot of Muslims went to Pakistan. A lot of Hindus went from that area to India. But still today, there's a lot of issues. There's a lot of anti-Muslim agenda, not just not just like random people, but there's a lot of organized efforts. So talk about that a little bit, and then highlighting the discrimination that people face, which is also the same discrimination that the lower caste people, the scheduled castes, face. And that ties us into the caste system. So this is also another place where I'd reiterate that this is very abridged. There's 4 main castes that was subdivided into 3,000 castes and like 25,000 subcastes. So this really isn't an in-depth look at that. The main point is that there's 4 main ones. Outside of those 4 main ones, there's the untouchable, or scheduled caste people. This was really like it's ingrained in their history and culture. It's not new. So by 4,000 or 400 BC, the caste system has been in place. A picture that we've probably all seen in history books, just showing what those 4 main castes are and where the scheduled castes or the Dalits fit in at the bottom. An overview of where caste differences are. So it's everywhere, but very prevalent in rural communities. So talking about what those differences are, like there's segregation, can't share water, you can't marry outside of your caste. Last names are a good indicator. So there's a lot of scheduled caste people that will change their last name and try and hide that they're from a lower caste to not be as boxed in and try and get more opportunities. There's also a lot of affirmative action today or positive discrimination, which sounds weird, but there's job and education quotas. So trying to get people outside of those, even though untouchability is unconstitutional, there's still a lot of that discrimination today. This is a map. Maybe I'll make this a little smaller because it's kind of pixelated, but just showing it's from 2011, but that seems to be what all the census figures and maps are. Looking into this, but showing where a lot of the scheduled caste populations are. So there's a lot really everywhere, but in this northern area, there's a high population. And then talking about what those implications are for being in that lower caste, tying into the poverty aspect. So people try to move to the city to escape that rural restrictions. Landlords and realtors won't rent or sell to those lower castes. They'll ask you, and like if you say it, they'll say no. If you try and hide it, they might find out and kick you out. So a lot of scheduled caste folks are forced to live in those informal settlements. This kind of ties into the lab. People can't buy a house or they can't rent, so they have nowhere else to go. They could go back to their village and live with those restrictions or try to live in the city, and maybe they have a job, but their only place to live is in these informal settlements with other scheduled castes or other people facing discrimination, like Islam practicing people facing those same discriminations. Government assistance is really limited. Services are really limited. You're living in an informal settlement. You're really not supposed to be there. So the government doesn't really like to support that because you're not supposed to be living there. It's not like really sound structures. So it's a cycle. This is just more information about those differences. I said this, but this is just so it's in writing that the Indian Constitution has abolished or it's made untouchability unconstitutional, but there's still a lot of those differences, segregation and discrimination. There's a lot of segregation based on caste and religion. It's more present in rural villages. This is research suggests this, not just opinions. And Human Rights Watch called this level of discrimination and segregation a hidden apartheid. So it's ongoing, even though it's unconstitutional, it's still happening and it's still an issue. And that was in 2007. So it's still going on today. This documentary, I really wanted to show, but it's only the trailer is on YouTube. So we could watch the trailer. We won't on this webinar, but in the class, students would watch the trailer, maybe look with a partner about this website a little more, what the documentary is about. It's about living in those informal settlements in India. This is an available documentary that I'd like to show with the students, or they can watch it online. And it's only like 45 minutes, but just an intro into what living in those settlements is like. This is the title of it. And then this is getting into trying to make those connections between what we see here in Rochester, where MCC is, and what we've talked about with the informal settlements, with that segregation or discrimination. Is there any comparison that you see or differences that you see between Rochester and this issue in India? Maybe thinking about high-rise, not just the low-income housing or the informal settlements, but also thinking about the flip side. So like high-rise buildings in India versus gated communities in Rochester, sort of a similarity there. Some of the high-rise buildings in India, they're like you're living in the like penthouse, but you're overlooking an informal settlement. So it's a stark difference just with your neighbor. I also wanted to, after we talk about sort of the abridged geography of India, talk about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So keeping with the global theme, a lot of these issues or these goals that the UN has, they're directly related to poverty and caste discrimination, religion discrimination. Poverty is the first goal. Well, no poverty. So thinking about the UN, GIS in the UN, Sustainable Development Goals. So it's kind of looking at how everyone's doing with these goals. Yeah, this is more about GIS in the UN. And then an overview of the lab assignment that I'm still working on, but maybe we can have a follow-up webinar when it's done. So the theme of the lab is just using geospatial technology to identify changes. Maybe that's urban growth over time. How's the landscape changed with that growth? And focusing on that one informal settlement. Some of the skills that the students will be working on or learning, georeferencing, whether they're doing it themselves or just using a georeferenced map. They're still using that skill, digitizing and creating features in GIS. This lab would be used with ArcGIS Pro, but it could be translated to open source or online. Really, any GIS could use this. And then this is just the last slide for the class. Reminder of what would be due. So that's it so far. Like I said, I am still working on this project, but I did want to share what I've been up to. I'll just put this overlay up and then I guess open it up for questions if anyone has any.
Thank you very much, Catherine. This sounds like a great grant program for developing these additional resources.
Thanks.
Is the application period open on an annual basis? I don't know if you have a link to the program that you
Yes,
could share.
I can share that. Let me stop sharing my screen. I will find a link to the program and send that in the chat. It is
Perfect.
annual, but I don't remember the actual date. I think last year there was a January deadline, but I think this year it was later in the year, not as early. But yeah, I'll send that right now. It's a great question.
And for any of the attendees, you can either put some questions in the Q&A channel, in the chat. If you'd like to raise your hand, we can unmute you. This recording will be available on YouTube hopefully next week. I'll get it up there. If you'd like to share it or rewatch for any of the details. All right, I do see a question that came up. All right, so this person uses ArcGIS Pro on a personal license. and makes maps for a nonprofit on a volunteer basis. Do you have any idea of how upcoming license changes will impact access to the users? I don't know. You didn't mention actually using ArcGIS for this, did you, Catherine?
I
Or,
did
okay.
it the lab that I'm working on
Mhm,
creating, it will be using ArcGIS Pro.
mhm.
I'm not sure how the license changes would impact nonprofit users. I feel like Esri has always had, um, I feel like it's like $100 for a personal license.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm not sure how, if they're changing the cost of that or changing licensing, how that would work. I feel like they still should have a nonprofit or personal use um, license, but I'm not sure how much it'll be. That's a really good question, though. I'm curious myself. But I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer for that.
We also have a question. What made you decide on India as the focus
That's
of
a
your project?
great question. Um, I this was inspired by my visit last year, and I wanted to apply for that one in particular, because the theme of it, that professional faculty development seminar, the theme was urban sustainability. And as a geographer and also someone with an urban slash community planning background, I was really interested in seeing how large, like mega cities, plan or account for being so urban, and just really interested. I know there's a lot of like overpopulation and air quality issues with being such a largely populated area. So I was curious to see how sustainability was being accounted for. And the that theme just happened to be the location was in India, and just been interested ever since.
So you mentioned using QGIS and open source products in your follow-up project to this. And so we have a question from someone who's interested in learning how to use QGIS and what those resources are that you recommend.
There are a ton of YouTube videos. I would definitely recommend checking out YouTube. Even just typing in QGIS, I'm sure there's a lot of videos that would just pop up from that. Because it's open source, there's a ton of resources out there. Um, just I think it's just the QGIS website. There's a whole sort of manual on how to use the different tools. So everything is free, really um, just a Google search to get you started, and then there's a ton out there. Now that's not really a specific answer, but there is so much out there. So just I would start with YouTube or just a quick Google search, and you will definitely find a lot.
Let's see. So did you have any other areas that you were considering before you chose this particular city in India?
I was the theme of this project, I was definitely sticking with India. Um, I wasn't sure if I would look into southern India or stick with the northern city of Lucknow. Um, but I ended up going with Lucknow just because I visited it and just felt a connection there. But for this project, India was in my proposal, so had to. I guess I could have changed it, but wanted to stick with that. Thank you.
You have a few more minutes if there's any other questions. All right. So thank you again for attending. We really appreciate your interest. And if you aren't familiar with the New York State GIS Association, please check us out online. It's it's www.nysgis.net, where you can see additional upcoming webinars and some additional resources that we have available. Thank you again, Catherine, for your great presentation. And you
Yeah,
guys
thanks
can
so
all
much.
check it out on YouTube in the next week or so.
Awesome.
All
Yeah,
right.
thanks for having me, and thanks to everyone who attended. Really appreciate it.
All right. Have a good week, everyone.